This is an excerpt from a story called Critique de la Vie Quotidienne. Our evenings lacked promise. The world in the evening seems fraught with the absence of promise if you are a married man. There is nothing to do but go home and drink your 9 drinks and forget about it. Slumped there in your favorite chair, with your 9 drinks lined up on the side table in soldierly array, and your other hand holding on to the plump belly of the overfed child, and perhaps rocking a bit if the chair is a rocking chair, as mine was in those days, then it is true that a tiny tendril of contempt, strike that, content, might curl up from the storehouse where the world's content is kept, and reach into your softened brain and take hold there, persuading you that this at last is the fruit of all your labors, which you'd been wondering about in some such terms as, where is the fruit? And so, newly cheered and warmed by this false insight, you reach out with your free hand, the one that is not clutching the 9 drinks, and pat the child on the head, and the child looks up into your face, gauging your mood as it were, and says, "Can I have a horse?" Which is, after all, a perfectly reasonable request in some ways, but in other ways is total ruin to that state of 6 o'clock equilibrium you have so painfully achieved, because it, the child's request, is of course absolutely out of the question. And so you say no as forcefully as possible, a bark rather like a bite, in such a way as to put the quietist on this project, having a horse, once and for all, permanently. But, placing yourself in the child's ragged shoes, which look more like used pillow pads than shoes, now that you regard them closely, you remember that time long ago on the other side of the Great War when you too desired a horse. And so, pulling yourself together and putting another drink in your mouth, that makes 3, I believe, you assume a thoughtful look, indeed, the same grave and thoughtful look you have been wearing all day, to confuse your enemies and armor yourself against the indifference of your friends, and begin to speak to the child softly, gently, cunningly even, explaining that the genus horse prefers the great open voids where it can roam or graze and copulate with other attractive horses to the confined space of a broke-down brownstone apartment, and that a horse, if obtained, would not be happy here in the child's apartment, and does he, the child, want an unhappy horse, moping and brooding and lying all over the double bed in the bedroom, and perhaps vomiting at intervals, and maybe even kicking down a wall or two to express its rage? But the child, sensing the way the discussion is trending, says impatiently with a chop of its tiny little hand, "No, I don't mean that," giving you to understand that it, the child, had not intended what you were arguing against, but had intended something else altogether, a horse personally owned by it, the child, but pastured at a stable in the park, a horse such as Otto has. Otto has a horse, you say in astonishment, Otto being a schoolfellow of the child, and indeed the same age, and no brighter as far as the naked eye can determine, but perhaps a shade more fortunate in the wealth dimension, and the child nods, yes, Otto has a horse, and a film of tears is squeezed out and presented to you over its eyes, and with liberal amounts of anathematization for Otto's feckless parents, and the profound hope that the fall of the market has ruined them forever, you push the weeping child with its filmic tears off your lap and onto the floor and turn to your wife, who has been listening to all of this with her face turned to the wall, and no doubt a look upon her face corresponding to that which St. Catherine of Siena bent upon poor Pope Gregory whilst reproaching him for the luxury of Avignon. If you could see it, but of course you cannot, as her face is turned to the wall, you look, as I say, to your wife as the cocktail hour fades, there being only 2 drinks left of the 9, and you have sworn a mighty oath never to take more than 9 before supper because of what it does to you, and inquire in the calmest tones available what is for supper, and would she like to take a flying off the moon for visiting this outrageous child upon you. She, rising with a regal sweep of her miniskirt, and not failing to let you have a good look at her handsome legs, those legs you could have if you were good, motors out of the room and into the kitchen, where she throws the dinner on the floor, so that when you enter the kitchen to get some more ice, you begin skidding and skating about in a muck of pork chops, squash sauce diable, Danish stainless steel flatware, and Louis Martini Mountain Red. So, this being the content of your happy hour, you decide to break your ironclad rule, that rule of rules, and have 11 drinks instead of the modest 9 with which you have been wont to stave off the song of twilight when the lights are low and the flickering shadows, etc., etc. But, opening the refrigerator, you discover that the slovenly bitch has failed to fill up the ice trays, so that there is no more ice for your 10th and 11th sloshes. On discovering this, you are just about ready to throw in the entire enterprise, happy home, and go to the bordel for the evening, where at least you can be sure that everyone will be kind to you and not ask you for a horse, and that the floor will not be a muck of sauce d'herbe and pork chops. But when you put your hand in your pocket, you discover that there are only $3 there, not enough to cover a sortie to the bordel, where unicards are not accepted, so that the entire scheme going to the bordel is blasted. Upon making these determinations, which are not such as to bring the hot flush of excitement to the old cheek, you measure out your iceless over-the-limit drinks, using a little cold water as a make-do, and return to what is called the living room, and prepare to live for a little while longer in a truce with your circumstances, aware that there are wretches worse off than you, people whose trepanations have not been successful, girls who have not been invited to the sexual revolution, priests still frocked. It is 7:30.